It was bad enough she'd failed in her kill. What was worse was her bandmothers chewing her out before the entire family. Even so, the absolute worst possible thing had to be dealing with her elder sister, Putviri, as they sat around with Rikishi, Kalis, and the younger Kits. The loss of face was humiliating. They had usually stuck together, but Putviri could be insufferable when she had a mind to. She was the eldest, and hadn't yet taken an adult name. Since the entire warband was under contract to Duchess Ileana, it had seemed they were doomed to keep on their best behavior and wait. Even so, as the oldest of the four, Putviri always presumed she would get her earned name first. Tom Warwick had changed all of that. If her bandmothers had scolded her for her failure and the risk to their contract, at least they'd understood her motives. Killing a Shovanti admiral was one thing. Killing a Shovanti admiral in single combat while defending a pack of Kits was another. The end of his inherited name settled the matter. Everyone agreed the loss wasn't acceptable. Her bandmothers were irritated, but while the talk had been deeply embarrassing, they hadn't forbidden her hunt. Not everyone was understanding, and the door had hardly closed before Putviri murmured her amusement. So, as those Shovanti you're stuck with would say, you fucked it up. I did not, Zinshiki said mildly, as she settled in next to Rikishi. She didn't look at her older band sister, but she had to calm her Asayak to hide her annoyance. Anyway, I like to see your plan for hiding your kill in a crowded school. So you say, Zingtwish. Putviri had been grooming Kalis's fur, and her Asayak flickered with second-degree Parashi, her amusement only richer for using the old pet name. Sounds to me like you were playing with your food. Zinshiki didn't blink as she settled in to groom Rikishi. Persian fur was thick and offered fine protection from the cold, short of an hour in a freezer, as well as the torrential rain that was common to the habitable zone of Pesh. Rikishi's pelt was the rich brown of good earth, mixed with swirls of cream, but she was cursed by it being long and unruly. Combing her out took ages, but she was her favourite sister, particularly when Putviri was being impossible. He'd only been there one day. I tracked his path and set the trap with almost nothing to go on, she shrugged. And a good hunter must act on what she knows, Rikishi said supportively, between purrs of contentment. It's not like we've learned much about these humans. Stories from the other warbands remain pretty vague. Pretty unbelievable, you mean? Putviri flicked her Asayak, in first-degree dismissal. Slower than us and louder, but they're supposed to be great hunters with a stamina of 5. How does that work? Putviri had fine yellow eyes, and her pelt was the colour of sand, mixed with tawny stripes. It was attractive, but could never compare to Zinshiki's. Her coat was grey as smoke in early twilight, and faintly reflected the light with a silvery sheen. It made the best possible camouflage, and growing up, Putviri had held her rage over her out of pure jealousy. The difference in their ages, while slight, has seemed far more important at 5 than 12. You're jealous, Zinshiki sniffed, looking over at her. She was rewarded by the fleeting aggravation on her sister's face, and a momentary flash of her Asayak. She decided to rub it in, letting more than a hint of fangs show. Evilheart is an exceptionally fine name for a hunter. I shall carry it with pride. Only if you don't spook your prey, Kit. The words should have been light-hearted, but the jealousy was there underneath. Perhaps this human is too tough for you. You wouldn't be disgraced if you call it off. You wish. Anyway, he's wounded. It's only fair that I didn't take him at the school. It was her turn to show a hint of fang now, and she did so with pleasure. Now, it will be a proper hunt. Nesva shook her head. I can't believe you called her old. I meant experienced, wise, Belda shuddered. The call to hope had gone. Well, she had the date. It could have been worse. Belle, you got the date, but I don't see how that could have been worse. Venerable is not a compliment. For all you know, she still has hopes of finding a man. Nesva buried her head in her hands and rubbed her forehead. Pris, help me here? The look of fragile hope on Belda's face was almost crushing. Pris visibly grimaced. Yes, you got the date, but you didn't earn any points with his matriarch. I swear my tits froze just listening to her. Yeah, an apology wouldn't go wrong there. Nesva nodded firmly. But don't call attention to it, Pris said helpfully. Belda pulled her knees up to her chin and rocked in uncertainly. How in the D's can I apologize for it without calling attention to it? Get her a gift, Nesva nodded sagely. Yeah, there must be something she likes. Just find out more about her. After all, she's going to be your mother-in-law. You really are a lucky Turox, Pris nodded. Just get on her good side. You only have one to worry about. Yeah, just ask Liam what she likes, Nesva nodded. What's the worst that could happen? It helped his mood that Leia began to sweat. It wasn't something you often saw with a Shovanti, but after her mother had cranked the temperature up past 90, and her co-mother lit the fire, that was enough, and he felt some vindication at the injustice of it all. Leia didn't seem to mind, slipping in close and wrapping her arms around him. She was a hugger, and seemed to have gotten it from her mother's. Miv was just as affectionate, but seemed to prefer holding his hand. The hugs were nice, though it would be easier to enjoy them outside of a sauna. She leaned her head in close and whispered, It's part of the ritual. They're just trying to rattle you a bit. It's not working. I'm cranky, getting a headache, and I can't sleep in the heat, but I'm not rattled. He murmured back. Well, not about that. I have a patron who wants me to star in her own version of How to Serve Man. That I'm rattled about. And the head administrator won't help at all? Leia grimaced, and hugged him a bit tighter. I know she and Ganya don't get on, but this is a matter of safety. For all I know, it's a matter of life or death, but she's banging the religious tolerance drum. Honestly, I think she's more worried about the girl's sponsor, but what am I going to say? In spite of the heat, he hugged her back before stepping free, shaking his head. Leia, I'm all for tolerance, but I never expected it to get me served up on a platter. Hell, I don't even know what alarms me more, the idea of being eaten raw, or carved up like a Thanksgiving turkey, and passed around with the stuffing and gravy. Leia looked as unhappy as he felt, and she studied his face for a moment. You're absolutely sure you don't want to report this to the constables? From what I've been reading, it would shame their honor, or maybe my honor. Someone's honor. He shook his head. The prospect of an angry warband hunting him down didn't appeal. Having one patron after me with rules is a problem, but a whole warband? Apparently they really hold a grudge. I'm going to take a hard pass on that one. I know my mothers are giving you a hard time with the heat, but they're just needling you a bit. Leia gave him a mischievous smile. In the meantime, look at the bright side. If she's hunting for you, now she has to come here. That's the bright side? This whole business with this girl has impressed them. Leah's smile turned into a cheeky grin. My mother's against one Petrin? They think it's wonderful. We have to stop meeting like this. You've been in a mood. Again. Desi leaned in Melondi's door for a moment, then slid into the chair when Mel shrugged miserably. I have my whole life on the line. A marriage, an adoption, a father-to-be who's surrounded by my soon-to-be co-mother, and 3 grandmothers. I haven't even met them yet, and he's run off to be surrounded by a school full of women. If my soon-to-be mother wasn't in on it, I'd be worried sick. That's all right. Melondi rolled over on her side and stopped poking at her omnipad. You still look worried sick. Of course I am! Desi threw her hands in the air. Why do you think I'm here? You being worried about something lets me stop thinking about it, so tell me what it is before I lose my mind. Mel still looked fretful, but she gave what was probably supposed to be a reassuring smile. Relax. He'll be back in 3 more days. Do you know what can happen in 3 days? This isn't the academy we're talking about. He doesn't have an escort. Dessin shook her head and threw her hands in the air before wrapping them around herself pensively. A few women, I could see. A classroom, even. But a whole school? You can't tell me there isn't some woman trying to pick him up. Goddess only knows what could happen. They'll eat him alive. Are you done now? Mel asked quietly, but she was grinning. Desi kept her hands wrapped around herself, but arched an eyebrow and cocked her head to the side. Only if you're going to tell me what's going on. Fine, Mel huffed. Agent Avari, my handler, she suggested I offer up Dasala to the Grinshaw as bait to see if whoever's after me bites. Oh, goddess. Desi spent a few moments thinking it over. What did you say? You're my advisor. Mel sat up a bit, resting a hand on one fist. What would you have told me to do? Meaning you did it already. Desi leaned the chair back and rocked on its back legs a moment, looking at her shrewdly. Dasala is a pussy bitch, and I've got no particular love for the way she acted whenever we ran into each other. But she went out of her way for you on principle, and you're going to have to deal with more than one difficult noble. Presuming I live through this. You aren't allowed to die, so yes, that. Desi stopped rocking on the chair and leaned forward. Seriously, I know someday you may have to do things you don't like, but there's a difference between doing it because you have to and doing it for convenience. I hope you told her no. It's her job to give me options, Mel said, after a lingering moment. But I told her no. Good, Desi nodded firmly. You're still my princess. Even better, you're still my advisor. Mel looked at her friend with some chagrin as her smile faded. I have to admit, it wasn't an easy choice, Desi. Someone is trying to kill me. This isn't like Professor Warwick going off on a school exchange. He's probably having the time of his life. Zinshiki had the luxury of time now, and she watched her prey as he worked through their 3rd class. Human expressions were a bit different from Shovanti, but not all that much. She gave her attention to her nose and the other cues he was giving off, trying to make sense of them. He'd done well until the class material ran out, before opening things up to questions. Humans couldn't lay their ears back, but she had the distinct impression he would have if he could. The Shovanti girls had gotten over their initial restraint, particularly after Gorfrey asked if he knew anything about a human boy seen dancing on the datanet. He was clearly a good hunter, but he stepped wrong by saying yes. Once he said the boy was dating his student, the occasional footfall of questions turned into a stampede. It wasn't that she was disinterested, as such. She understood the importance of gaining a mate better than any of these girls. It was just the lack of tact. They were as ungainly about that as they were about everything else. That didn't make it without use. She hadn't seen the video of the boy the rest of the girls were going on about, but they were all swooning over it and asking about his stamina, so that stood up against the rumors. There were questions about Earth. She never lived on a planet as long as she had on Shill, and the idea of being on a world with only 8 billion people was novel. The very idea of open forests and hunting grounds without a Shilvanti around every corner was appealing. Inevitably, one of the girls asked about the story in the news. It was dishonorable questioning a hunter about a kill, and Helmia blundered into it like a grazing Turox, but it was interesting. Warwick didn't freeze exactly, but she heard the change in his breath. The Shilvanti had inferior hearing, but she watched him pause as if scenting the air. As the moment wore on, she paid more attention to the smell of him. There was no scent of fear, but he picked his words cautiously. Yes, I stand by what I said. It made me angry. I didn't have a choice, but I wasn't going to just roll over and die. Not for anyone. The defiance was earned, and the veiled challenge aimed her way made her bare her fangs in bemusement. Humans might look like Shilvanti, but if they were all like Warwick, then they had Fatahiski. They did not venture gently into the cold. Still, he had challenged her. Even if the Shill had missed it, she had not. The pear string would have had her tail in a twist, and even if he lacked an Asaiak, the veiled questions about sex were getting on his nerves. A challenge for a challenge, then. She raised her hand and waited. Yes, Miss Sinshiki. Hateful as it was to stand exposed, she rose. Her Asaiak might have flexed in languid amusement. There was no reason she could not taunt the Shill while learning a valuable truth. I have looked at both your interviews, Professor. Ignore the question if you deem it impertinent, but I do not know if you are representative of humans, and it was not asked in your interviews. She blinked languidly, though the significance was doubtlessly lost on him. Have you forgiven the Shilvanti? Well, no one has asked except an agent of the interior. There was that pause again, and she wondered if perhaps humans did have a keen sense of smell. She didn't look around at the swirl of consternation in her classmates, and was careful to blink no more than once. It was all they deserved. You want the truth? I'll tell you what I told him. I'm a civilized person, with occasional lapses, but the last person I tried to forgive stuck a knife in me. You want to know if I've forgiven the Imperium for killing my wife and daughter? The answer is no. A philosopher on my world once said that if you're going to hurt someone, you better do it so hard that they never think of coming back at you. And I'll admit, the loss of my family almost killed me. The Imperium took everything from me that mattered. Warwick turned his gaze from her then, to the others. I'm engaged to marry 2 very fine Shilvanti women who I love very much, and I've made Shilvanti friends, so it's fair to say I've set what happened aside, closed the door on it. Maybe another human would be able to forgive, but I'm not a saint, and right now my capacity for forgiveness is pretty thin. I make no apologies. It's the best I can do, and it's all anyone is going to get. The class grew quiet, but inside she wanted to scream defiance in his name. The name that would be hers. Humans clearly understood Kalangrist, the pride anger for an offense that could never be quenched except in blood. He was a hunter. Naturally, he had no more room in his heart to forget a wound from an enemy than he had a need to regret his kill. The very idea made her want to sneer at the Shill. But he had answered her question. I see. Thank you, Professor. You're welcome, Miss Sinshiki. And for the rest of you, you don't have to look like I shot the cat. so to speak. Warwick shrugged. I still believe that young fellow you've been watching is the shape of things to come. Someday, the humans who lived through the Empire's arrival will all be gone. Odds are, if you ask one of us nicely, you'll be able to get a date. Yes, Miss Parada. She watched Parada Nikto bolt to her feet, still clutching her omnipad. So, Professor Burgress is right? There could be no mistake. His ears would definitely have flattened. As you can see by the chart, Kaiser Wilhelm was first cousin to both King George V and Tsar Nicholas. Isilla Borai gestured at the screen behind her and sniffed. I suppose now you can see why the Imperium needed to intervene. Humanity needed our guidance. Can you imagine such barbarous actions within your own family? I've only been reviewing this material for a few days, but it's clear after even the most cursory look at how they began slaughtering one another the moment they had a chance. Now, since I've been encouraged by Professor Pellavon to ask questions, what are your thoughts, Mr. Sala? She stared at the screen, shaking her head, and turned idly back to the girls. Deshin was already on her feet. They are not barbarians! She tutted to herself, but didn't jut her tusks at the girl. Someone had clearly eaten the papaya that Warwick was feeding them. Still, it was insufferably rude, and she needed to put the girl in her place. I did not ask you, Miss Deshin. Sit down at once. Now, Mr. Sala? The Serhart girl stood up and lifted her chin slowly. Deshin is right. She could hardly believe her ears, as the girl actually pressed on without permission. Humans were not technically sophisticated when the Imperium arrived, but they're culturally advanced, probably due to having so many subcultures exchanging ideas. It's foolish to mistake the one for the other. Foolish! Foolish! Deshi has seemed like the most sensible girl of the lot. She could see just how wrong she was now. The impertinence was beyond all belief. Are you girls taking me for a fool? It might be a fair trade, Melondi blurted out. Excuse me? Who cares about first cousins? I have a sister who could fill in just fine. Well, Borai flounced. She rather felt she needed to give her words the extra weight. I'm sure I don't know how your mother raised you, Miss Melondi, but right now you're being a very poor reflection on our nobility. The Empress would have words for your mother, I'm sure. Strong words at that. That certainly got the girls looking at one another, and she felt a moment of visceral satisfaction. It was just as well to make such points with emphasis. Goddess only knew what these nobles were teaching one another, much less at the hands of a human. Well now, what have you got to say for yourself, Miss Melondi? The girl was burning blue and sputtering, doubtless for the utter humiliation she so rightfully deserved in front of her classmates. The Deshin girl raised her hand. Again. There just had to be one know-it-all in every class. Yes, Miss Deshin? I think my friend wants to say that you shouldn't speak so soon, Professor. The wheel's still in spin. I'm sorry. She blinked, trying to understand such nonsense. What is that supposed to mean? Desi looked over at Mel, who was fuming. It means you better start swimming, or you'll sink like a stone. The times are a-changing. Tom had decided there was something deeply irritating about anyone that self-assured, particularly when they were trying to eat you. Shinshiki seemed to move through life being well aware, but acting as if everything else was a secondary concern. He wondered if that extended to other Pezrin. It seemed rude to bring it up. That didn't mean he lacked questions. His inner savannah monkey was in a tree throwing poo at him for sitting down with a lion and telling him what he could do about rude. But at least the lion was answering questions. Next to the tree, an elderly figure with a faintly bemused smile was standing beside a man in khaki shorts. They were offering the monkey a banana. "Hi, I'm Marlon Perkins from Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Jim is taking a breather after we had him wrestle an anaconda in creamed corn last week, so I've asked Steve Owen to step in and show us what happens when you tell a Pezrin that she and her family can just fuck off in the middle of a gynecological exam. Whenever you're ready, Steve."
"Crikey! Ain't she a big pussy, mate? I bet she'll get properly cross when I tell her to sod off. Let's give it a try, right after I shove my whole—"
"Not helpful," Tom muttered, as he walked towards a table in the cafe. At least it wasn't the Swedish chef coming after him with a chainsaw. It was comforting to know his subconscious was still rooting for him at least.
"What isn't, Professor?"
Zinshiki had accepted his invitation to join him for lunch. It seemed like a good idea at the time. If he could just talk to her, or learn something useful. Never mind, just an errant thought. He sighed wistfully. Settling down beside her, he watched as she pulled something that appeared half-cooked from a tote bag, and tried not to wonder if she'd carry him around the same way. "You tried baiting me in class today."
"Well, I suppose you're the expert on such things," she said dryly,
starting to walk away with her head and tail held high.
"What would I know? I'm only a Pezrin."
He could feel the scowl sealing over him, and he stopped it, keeping his words carefully neutral. "That's not what I'm saying, and you know it."
"Perhaps. I see now that you care for your Fatahiski."
Zinshiki shrugged slightly, and he watched as she flexed a hand. Claw showed briefly. It might well mean something, but the girl had a way of becoming inscrutable whenever she wished to be. Maybe it was a Pezrin thing. There was no way to tell, so he changed the subject. "So, you wanted to know about my name. What can you tell me about yours?" Zinshiki yawned slowly, with every hint of careful deliberation, revealing a mouthful of sharp teeth and an astonishingly pink tongue.
"Pezrin don't have names. That is not something we do."
"I'm sorry, you don't have names?" Tom canted his head. "What about Zinshiki?"
"No, that's something that other races do. Zinshiki is only my lineage name. It is not me."
She shrugged, and her tail twitched as if she was amused.
"You people have names because you don't know who you are. Pezrin know who we are, so we don't need them. I am not Zinshiki. I am only borrowing Zinshiki from my great-granddame for a time. She was Zinshiki, and it was her earned name. She had green eyes as well, so it was given to me to care for during my time as a kid. When I complete the ritual, then I will have a name of my own to care for. I hand down when the time of my death comes, and then I will be that name."
"And you want to take my name by killing me?" It was damnable how stubborn the girl was. He might be learning something that would save his life, but any hopes he had of talking her out of it were fading fast.
"Of course," she nodded. "You are a proven hunter, and you've honored your line. I will make sure your name will be honored and have meaning as a part of me."
He pondered that for a moment. It meant something to a Pezrin, but it was nothing he could put together on the spot. Doesn't Zinshiki have meaning?
"Naturally, but it is my great-granddame's meaning, not mine. I am only borrowing it until I earn my own."
He sighed slightly. The girl might be an open book, but the pages were blank. "You wouldn't consider just keeping it to give it more honor?"
"You really do not understand at all."
She sighed ruefully, looking at him with what he imagined was pity.
"Who could value whatever they are given? No one. What sort of world would it be where you were just given things, and didn't bestow worth by earning them?"
She looked at him intently then.
"Your name should have the most worth of all."
"That's a different point of view." Tom licked his lips. I can understand it, though.
Of course you can. You may be a human, but you are still a hunter.
Shinshiki shrugged, as if it were self-evident.
The Shovanti are saying in the news that you were very brave, as if it was something they need to teach themselves.
Maybe. Half the time I've been saying I was scared out of my mind. He sighed then. It wasn't something he'd admitted to Miv or Leia, and not entirely to himself. The Shovanti seem to like hearing it. I hope it does more good in the long run if my people aren't seen as a threat.
A hunter's trick. It lulls them into false security. But were you, really?
She asked, although somehow the way she did so made her sound barely interested. When it was happening, I don't remember having the time to think about it. After it happened, and I was laying on the floor, I wasn't.
Then it was brave.
Shinshiki blinked at him, slowly, before casting her eyes slightly down.
When you're frightened, but you do what needs doing anyway, that is brave.
Thanks. It was an alien sentiment. Not alien like some of the Shovanti he'd met. It lacked any of the matronizing attitude, as if he'd done a surprising trick. Miv and Leia weren't like that, but even so, he could tell there were times he stretched their worldview a bit. This was just pure and unvarnished acceptance, and somehow it was nice to hear.
You are welcome, she said firmly. I will remember to sing it of you after I have eaten your heart.
Your body done, pisky done. Bog, bog, bog. Today we have a Sworden Frieda Warwick Sundevich. Somewhere in his mind was the sound of a chainsaw. His inner savannah monkey gave him the finger, turned his back, and climbed higher up the tree. Melondi sat down to lunch. It was ungracious to drop her tray on the table with a clatter, but she still couldn't believe it. A bad example? What would my mother say? If you only knew what my mother would say to you. Priss was sitting across from Desi and the others. For a wonder, Desala was sitting with them, down by Letzi. No one said a word. You have to give her points for irony, Zephyr said, finally breaking the silence, even if she didn't know it. Melondi stared. It was it was unjust. She'd never broken the silence about her cover until she'd had to. Now she wanted to scream it out to the world. My great-great-grandmother would have nailed her tits to the table, she muttered. It wasn't satisfying, but she muttered it with feeling. It was better than nothing. Nesfer frowned in thought. Wasn't she the one who did the thing, that one solstice celebration with the Cambrians? Jaxmi shook her head. The one who rode the Taurox inside? No, that was her aunt. It felt like her temple was starting to throb. Colourful anecdotes about family aside, the sheer gall. I can't believe she gave us all a spot exam. And flunked us. Desi's scowl would have done Warwick proud. Desi had a good nature, but she studied like a fiend. The scowl was merited. Belda set her drink down and canted her head. You talked with Professor Pelavon after class. Why couldn't you stop her? She says it's part of the exchange program. Professor Borai has the same rights as if Professor Pelavon or Professor Warwick. Desi's scowl deepened, looking ready to take a life of his own. The test score has to stay. Well, what are we going to do? Priss said miserably. Another mark like that won't just trash our class score, it will affect our whole average. It could, and we still need good marks if we're going to get a good internship before working for our family. Kamara nodded, as Kazan chimed in. She's right, we can't afford to trash our grades. It's human studies, Desala spoke up, pursing her lips. What would a human do? I don't know, Lark shrugged. Maybe nailing her tits to the table isn't too far off. That was a thought. No, she's right. Mel nodded. It was a tentative idea, but there was some weight to it.
Desi, what would Warwick do? You mean aside from beheading her in the library?
Desi arched an eyebrow, looking at her warily. The expression seemed unjust. She only partly wanted to nail her tits to the table.
Yes, I mean non-violently. What would he do? What would a human do, exactly? I mean, if she follows through with that threat to test us again, we're pretty much screwed. How do we get around it? Well, I suppose there was that one thing he mentioned.
Desi pursed her lips and grimaced.
You're not going to like it, though.
Zinshiki had managed to get an autocab. She was going to have to pay back Raikishi, but it was enough. She'd also managed to keep Warwick's cab in sight, and while she was constantly telling it to change directions, it wasn't too erratic. When she saw Warwick's cab pull into a house, she ducked down into the passenger seat and had it roll on past. He was home. It would be properly dark in another hour, and she could observe until then. She had him. Darkness had fallen, and Tom fixed dinner again, stewing all the while. There were enough supplies left over for spaghetti, garlic bread, and a few other trimmings. He planned to cook for 2, not 5, and cooking half the week was the only way to make things stretch. It wasn't that the food wasn't eaten. It was Hegel picking at it all evening. It was Phyllis setting a blaze in the hearth just short of a forest fire. Most of all, it was Della making comments about grandchildren. Somehow, whenever he brought up Desi, she didn't seem to count. The 3 of them dismissed her out of hand, and it had begun grating on his nerves. Leia tried to be supportive about Desi, but they'd only shared time in the hospital. It wasn't much to go on, and his future mothers-in-law wasted no time saying as much. Sweat was pouring down the back of his neck as he finished the dishes, letting Leia talk with her mothers. Not that it made the conversation better. It was a blessing just not having to join in. 2 days nude in the woods would have been a vacation in paradise. 2 days was manageable. There was still half a week of this to go. Idiot. And here you thought the nudity was going to be the problem. There was plenty of time before he could reasonably claim fatigue, and Della was on a tear about imperial prerogatives in her day. Excuse me, ladies. Dinner's all cleaned up. I need to get some air. He was already pulling on a jacket. The temperature outside was cold enough to be refreshing. Given the 3 monsters-in-law enjoyed breathing fire, at least they wouldn't follow him out by the pool. He could clear his head for 10 minutes.
Liberated worlds knew their place, then. That whole business with the Cambrians, let me tell you a thing or two.
Maybe 20 minutes. The house was situated along a cliffside, with the back quarter surrounded by a low fence and a hedge. It was a difficult approach, but after a short time, she'd seen all she needed. She hung along the cliff, just below the lip of the fence. It was hard to get a good look, but she dared enough of a look now and then to spot her prey in the feasting den. He wasn't alone. That was a problem. Alone he would be easy, but there were 4 other Shilvanti women there. It was hard to get a good look, but she huddled below the fencing, her claws sure. Night had begun to fall, and her grey cloak hid her perfectly in the gathering dust. Darkness came and fell, and still she waited. She would wait until the house was quiet, make her way inside, and take him by the throat as he slept. No one would be the wiser. Her ears pricked up as she heard the sound of a door sliding open, and she shrank against the cliffside, still as the stone itself. There was a voice. His voice. He was coming closer. All too easy. The cold air was a blessing. If there was a snowbank, he might well have jumped into it out of sheer relief. He looked back inside as Leia was talking animatedly with her mothers. Maybe 30 minutes would be a push, but 20? 20 would do. That only left the real problem: being stalked and eaten. At least he was home now. The school was safe, but out here by the pool? The home security system was set. That much he'd seen to, and the pool was on the edge of a sharp cliff. He'd already felt like enough of an idiot with his fiancée and her mothers checking the cab to see if she'd been hiding in the back seat before getting in. One had patted him on the head and handed him his lunch. He'd felt 6. The sound of music queued up. 3 nuns were breaking out into their version of "How do you solve a problem like a Pezrin?" and he shook his head. Not helpful. The girl was intractable. It wasn't like she was actually a cat, but damned if she didn't seem close enough. Rockin' Robin said, "Oh, mama, please, I'm begging you down on bended knees. I wanna go jam, wanna jump and shout, down on the corner where the cats hang out." Good song, but still not helpful. Robin said, "Rockin', you're making me cry. A robin's gotta rock and a bird's gotta fly. Before you make the jump and go out rockin' tonight, it's time I tell you a few facts of life." The datanet's no help. The guides, some help. But there were a lot of blanks on the Pezrin. All I know is there might be a limited number of chances to get me. That she can't hunt me at school now. That going to the authorities was certain death by vendetta. Although they wouldn't eat me then. Big help. Only just turn me into tender victuals. Oh, and I'm wounded prey and old. She has to scream first. Cats will be cats, and cats will be cruel. Cats will be callous, and cats will be cruel. Cats will be cats, remember these words. Cats will be cats, and cats eat birds. Damn. Glaring down at the slate flagstone beneath his feet, he blinked as he realized he was standing on his own shoelace. He'd nearly tripped. So much for situational awareness. He was right there. If not for the fence, she could have reached out and grabbed him, pulling him to his death on the rocks below. It merely proved that patience in your stalk was a virtue. Cold and alone, clinging to the side of the cliff at night. She had earned this. It was just, and it was good. She would take him, and take her name. Zinchiki extended her claws, her fangs bared as she flexed. It would be one easy leap over the fence, and she'd take him by the neck. She tensed, called her strength like a spring as she grasped at the top of the fence, and screamed as ritual demanded, "Cheer-row-row-aye!" Bending down to tie the errant shoelace, Tom felt more than saw the shrubbery explode. One moment he'd been singing along to Timbuk Free, and the next, pain happened. It was a good leap. It deserved points for style. It was heroic in its grace. She vaulted the fence and soared over the shrub with ease. The only problem was Warwick wasn't where he should have been. She sailed over, reaching out with her claws, and while they connected, they didn't bite. She had the sense to twist herself in midair. She'd land on the water. She was in water. She was wet. The scream of challenge turned into primal fear as she saw where she was going. An entire pool? She felt the biting sting of cold water, and panic washed over her. She couldn't swim! Tom stared at his hand. It came away from his neck, wet with blood, and he felt the cuts. Somehow he still had the presence of mind to spin around at the splash. It was Shinshinki. It had to be. She'd gone in the pool by the purest fluke. With a little luck, he could kick her back in as she pulled herself out. Maybe call out for help, if they hadn't heard. She was right there, flailing wildly, going down for the second time. It just figures. Live on a planet where open water could bore you or freeze you? And what did you get? Pezrin live in space. A whole race of people that don't know how to swim. The thrashing was getting worse. Panic was etched on her face as she flailed about, and he braced himself before reaching in, grabbed her by the scruff of her neck, and pulled. Right. You missed again, and this time I saved your life. It felt like the sort of thing that might make a difference to a Pezrin. In hindsight, he realized he probably should have waited until she wasn't panicking. After drying off, the Great Elder named Hegel walked her out to the waiting autocab. Failure hung heavily. She could never admit that he was right about saving her life. It was already all she could do not to droop her aside in abject shame. All she wanted was to get in the cab and go. The Great Elder blocked the door. Dear, I want to thank you for a very interesting evening. The Elder was smiling now, baring her fangs, tusks and all. My family and I, we're Shamantal worshippers. Do you know much about that? Ignorance of Shulvanti customs was excusable, and she shook her head. The thing is, that young man is our future son-in-law. Oh, he doesn't know it yet because we've been giving him the worst time of it. Just practical, you know. Hold something up to Sham's light and you see it for what it truly is. So, a week of stress? That just shows us if he's as nice as he seems to be. Hegel carried on. Now, I have to admit, the heat really wasn't working. But I really ought to thank you. The Elder's smile faded, but she still jutted her tusks, threateningly. Dear, I was a Marine Scout. Phyllis was a Line Sergeant Major, and Della was Naval Intelligence. You've been a delightful distraction, but I should tell you the truth. We love our daughter, and by Shamantal, if you ruin our chance to finally have a grandchild, we're going to fucking hunt you down and skin you alive. Zinshiki's ears flinched as she considered the Great Elder. Finally, a Shulvanti she could understand. Tom lay back on the couch. The numbing effect of the salve on his arm and neck was taking most of the pain, but they still hurt like the blazes. A frightened Pezrin and bare arms had been a bad idea. Then again, another tiny bit deeper on his neck, and his spine would have been pulled out like... spaghetti? Fuck. It was past time to take this seriously. The girl wanted him dead, as she hadn't been fooling around this time. The whole claim of saving her life had fallen on deaf ears. Whatever honor code the Pezrin ascribed to, she might as well have been a stone. Fine. She can't hunt me at work, she can't hunt me here. That just leaves... Bringing a Pezrin and or family of Pezrin back to the academy, cram-packed with a campus full of students, a bunker's worth of Death's commandos, one special agent of the interior, and a very tetchy Ganya Sasano. Oh, that ain't good. He thumbed open his Omnipad and dialed. The favor was going to cost him, but he'd earned it. Berdin? Hi, it's Tom. Look, I'm sorry to be calling during the dinner rush, but I need to ask a favor. What? No, don't add curry to that. Don't ever add curry to that. Look, I'm going to need the restaurant tomorrow night. He listened a moment or two, considering what this was going to cost him. No, It's not cooking, as such. I guess you could call it protective camouflage.